Can you guys still hear me okay? Can you all hear me?
Hear you. Can you hear us, Alicia?
I can hear you now. I could.
Okay. My apologies, Madam Chair.
No problem.
So Ms. Hughes Candies is present. Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
Walal Hidak.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
And Ms. Hale.
Here.
Mayor Weldon is not with us this evening, and a quorum is present.
Thank you. Madam Manager, are there any requests for agenda changes?
No.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any requests or does the Assembly approve the agenda? Seeing no objection, that agenda is approved. Are there any requests for changes to minutes from the March 6th, April 3rd, April 24th, and December 2nd, 2023 Assembly Committee of the Whole meetings and retreat? Seeing none, those minutes are approved. Madam Manager, moving on to the first topic, item 5, overview of the Juneau School District deficit. Will you please introduce this topic for us? And if I may, to the Assembly, we will cover this in great depth tomorrow. So I'm asking, Superintendent Hauser will give us a brief presentation, but I'm asking that we keep our comments and questions to a minimum because we will be addressing this tomorrow. The purpose of this in the packet and the presentation tonight is just to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. I think I'll just briefly reiterate your comments that the purpose of this particular agenda item is to really make sure the Assembly all understands exactly where we are, and then we have a joint meeting with the school board tomorrow. So really trying to give you today to kind of have it digest in your brain, and maybe you'll have some questions tomorrow, which you can come to Superintendent Hauser or I with, or members of the school board, and then tomorrow we will continue that conversation. So I do know that Superintendent Hauser has a few slides to share with you all. I will hand it over to him.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Superintendent Hauser.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hill. Honorable members of the Assembly, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen on Zoom just so everybody's able to see what we'll be presenting today. I usually like to have it in presenter mode, so let's see if that works. I'm optimistic.
Look at that.
Success. So I just have a brief presentation that I'd like to provide tonight. It's really broken up into 3 sections, but I know, as was just said, that we're going to talk about this in great length tomorrow during our joint meeting. And so I'll just cover the first section tonight, which is really going to be looking at the current status of the Juneau School District budget deficit. And then we'll get an opportunity to talk more about some of the significant revenue kind of assumptions that were in place that really underpinned the budget that was really in place for this year. And then, tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about kind of moving forward. And so after a recent independent audit, I brought in an experienced school finance specialist, Lisa Pierce, who spent the holiday going through the district's budget line by line. Ms. Pierce prepared a revision to the budget that was developed and adopted last spring. That budget overstated district revenues by $5.9 million, and it also understated district expenses by $2.1 million. The district's memo for this meeting includes this chart and walks through the main issues with the spring 2023 budget, the current budget that we're working on for FY24. You see here the overstatements, miscategorizations, and understatements that needed to be corrected. I'll draw your attention to the PERS and TERS on behalf, kind of overstatement and miscategorization in particular. The corrections resulted in a 7.6 million projected deficit for FY24 this current school year, plus the deficit from the 22-23 school year that was identified in the audit. And that brought the district to the total $9.5 million deficit figure that we've been talking about. When Ms. Pierce and I presented on this budget revision on January 9th, I announced a goal of identifying $1 million in savings. I am pleased that the district has exceeded that goal and identified 1.65 million in reductions. You see those at the bottom of the chart. These included reductions in operations and excess budget identified in health insurance. That brings the projected FY24 deficit to just under $6 million, plus the carryover deficit from the FY22-23 school year for a total operating fund deficit of just under $8 million now.
And if I could just interject, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this before, but this is in your red folder. There is this packet presentation.
Okay. I don't have the full historical picture on the budget process from last spring, but one thing I'll point out, which I think is instructive, is that last spring's budget contained a series of revenue assumptions to build that projected budget. This is from the district's budget presentation from last year. You see here, there's an assumed BSA increase beyond what materialized, an assumed increase in enrollment, and here's that assumed 84% increase in PERS and TERS on behalf. The budget from last spring overstated district revenues by almost $6 million, and that was the most significant issue. Those assumptions, in turn, supported another assumption, that the district could continue with its current expenditures and operations costs, even lowering the pupil-teacher ratio last year. As Ms. Pierce has said, the district didn't have trips to Hawaii, and we didn't have $50,000 bonuses. You were being squashed from a revenue side, and the bottom side of the expenditures was not stopping. It was like kind of a freight train that was coming from both directions. And so kind of the next step that I know we'll be talking about is kind of a pathway moving forward for the Juneau School District. And so at this point, I will go and pause the presentation until tomorrow and just offer any if there's any questions that the Assembly has at this time.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Hauser, and thank you so much to you and everyone for all the work you've put in. Are there any questions at this time that would help the Assembly as we prepare for the meeting tomorrow? Mr. Bryson.
I don't need the answer tonight, but if we could get a list of what that 1.6 million in cuts, what kind of things that the district has already changed to start to make up some of this debt, so that we have better understanding what actions have already been taken. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Excellent request. Will you be able to provide that, Superintendent Hauser? Mike? Thank you.
Sorry about that, through the chair. Yeah, we'll be able to provide that information, and I can kind of offer it right now. Right now, as far as operational savings, we've frozen some staffing hires. We have stopped a lot of our supply budgets and frozen some of the supply budget usage right now, as well as been able to shift some positions over to the grant positions that have realized in kind of the operations side about $350,000. For kind of carryover allotments for Homebridge, we were able to realize about a $300,000 savings from those. There's still a commitment to make sure students have full access to their allotment, but that is one area based on historical trends we feel that we can bring that $300,000 in. And then there was excess budget identified in the enrollment for health insurance line item, and so we're able to reclaim about $1 million from that area. So those three items, of course, operations is more detailed issues in there, but those three items equated to $1,650,000 in that identified savings. And we're still looking and trying to find some additional savings.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you. I just had one question. It looks like part of the problem was that there was projection of budget based on potential state increases in funding. And with the BSA still being an ongoing conversation at the legislative level, do you intend to budget based off of a projected increase or what's currently in statute for next year?
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Mr. Superintendent Hauser.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. What I would say right now is I would probably approach it from a more conservative perspective. That would be my recommendation to the board. Ultimately, the board approves the budget, but my recommendation would be to build a budget based on the information we know to be true, which is, BSA of $5,960. If that changes through conversations that are happening, at the Capitol, that would definitely take those into consideration. But at this point, my recommendation to the board would be to budget conservatively and make sure that we don't over-project and, find ourselves in a similar situation going into next school year.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any other questions? Ms. Wallen and Mr. Smith, and I would ask again that we keep this brief, if possible. We have a big agenda.
Thank you, Madam Hale. Madam Deputy Mayor, could you walk me through kind of the timeline of what needs to be fixed? I understand we can't carry a deficit. There's last year's budget it ended in a deficit. This year's budget will, and then thinking about next year, what's the order of operations, and then cash flow, and what needs to be fixed when?
Through the chair.
Briefly, please.
Yes, you're asking a lot of me, but I will try to make it brief. Really, I've said it before, time and math are not on our side. And so really the timeline that we're looking at is the board needs to have a balanced budget for FY24 and FY25. To start building FY25, we need to have a line for FY24. So what I would see as an ideal scenario is by February 13th, the board meeting, we have a first reading of an FY24 balanced budget, which means that we'll have to figure out if there's any thoughts around potential loan options, potentially some shared services, looking at some of those for FY24, and then also looking at what that might bring for FY25. Of course, the other piece that is challenging is deciding on reorganization, the structural changes that need to happen across the district to try to address larger savings. It would take $120,000 individual cuts to reach the current budget deficit that we have right now. And so we really need to look at large structural changes to address the large deficit. And so those have a set timeline really before we get into that February 13th meeting at the board. I'd really like to have final ideas on potential reorganization models that would be considered and a budget for FY24 that we can adopt that would be balanced no matter what it takes to balance that budget.
Thank you, Superintendent. I will entertain questions from Mr. Smith and Mr. Kelly only if they are concise questions that will have short answers, because we really do have a full agenda. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll defer till tomorrow. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
I'll do the same.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wall, I see concern on your face. Are you okay with that?
I am. I just want to, tomorrow I think we're having a discussion and less a question and answer. So if there are questions that people have, maybe get them answered tomorrow before the discussion, but maybe I'm misunderstanding maybe the manager can help.
Madam Manager, will there be opportunity for the Assembly to ask questions? And that's a really good question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an agenda structured with, I believe, a summary of today's meeting is the first item on the agenda. That would be a great time for Superintendent Hauser to finish his presentation. The second item is a model tool that the district has adopted to try to explain, help the community understand the magnitude of the cuts, and if you tweak it here and you tweak it there, what that will happen. And then there's a memo in your packet for tomorrow from me that talks about what a loan could look like, prompts some questions on shared services, and really tries to get direction from the group so that CBJ staff can move quickly and help the district meet their deadline. So I believe tomorrow will be a packed evening full of questions and discussion and hopefully some direction.
Thank you very much, Madam Manager. And it sounds like at that first part of the meeting, if there are these broad questions, that there'll be room for the Assembly to ask those broad questions. Ms. Wall, I know you didn't raise your hand, but I noticed the expression on your face and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to ask that question.
That was excellent. Thank you, Superintendent Hauser. Is there anything you'd like to add before we move on to the next item on our agenda?
No, I just want to thank the Assembly for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight and look forward to further conversations and discussions tomorrow. So thank you.
That's terrific, and thanks for being here. And I also want to thank school board members for being here. Really, really appreciate your taking the time, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Madam Manager, shall we move on to the next item on the agenda, results from the request for the RFI? Request for
Deputy Mayor
information.
Hale, on page 30 of your packet, you have a memo from Land and Resources Manager Blydorn that summarizes the responses to the request for information that the city issued. If you recall, we issued a request for three different scenarios for downtown office workers. One scenario was all of City Hall, which we estimated to be 46,000 square feet, based on what we were asking for a new city hall. That number, of course, would vary, depending on the actual space. We asked respondents to respond to a scenario of 100 CBJ employees, so that would relocate most downtown employees that maintain city hall, and then just relocating Marine View staff. So we got three responses to that request, and really thankful for those people who took time to respond. The first response was for the Burns Building. That's where the Permanent Fund Corporation is currently located. It's almost a 73,000 square foot building, and they will have, that building will have leased space available in a variety of different scenarios. So they have up to 44,000 square feet of lease space available starting July 1. So a nice large building. It's also very, I've done a tour of that facility. It's very nice office space, right? Like big open floor plan that can easily be cubicled, and it would be a easy transition because of the quality of that space. The second proposal we received was for the Bill Ray Center. This is owned by Dawson. They also own the adjacent parking lot, and they responded with a number of different scenarios for remodeling and constructing a facility based on the three different scenarios. Their application shows that they have a great depth of experience in building facilities like that. And then the third proposal was for a couple of properties in the valley by the Renninger Skate Park in that neighborhood. And these are currently short-term rentals and commercial lease space. And they had different scenarios as well that would require extensive remodeling. So what my recommendation is to this body is kind of twofold. The first would be to authorize staff to enter into negotiations with Richter Real Estate that is representing the Burns Building and the Permanent Fund Corporation. And in order to answer some questions, you can see on page 31 of the packet, I have some questions that I feel like need to be answered for this body to be able to make a decision moving forward. Budget is primary among them. Could we, what about parking? I feel like parking is still a really big unknown. The proposal said one spot per 520 square feet. Okay, well, no matter what scenario it is, it might not be enough parking. There's all kinds of things we could look at for parking, and I've gotten some great feedback from individual members on ideas for that. So that's the first part of my ask. And the second part of my ask from you is to gauge your comfort level of really engaging and moving all city, downtown city employees and possibly assembly chambers to a leased property, or if you're more comfortable with, only moving some and kind of what that looks like. Because I think that will help staff as we try to get these questions answered to bring you back more information at the next regular committee of the whole on the 26th.
Thank you very much, Madam Manager. And we'll please take questions. And then at some point, I will want to make sure that I understand every assembly member's preference in terms of all of City Hall, park, that sort of thing. So, but please take questions first. Mr. Kelly, did I see your hand raised? And then Ms. Atkinson, and I believe Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I had some follow-up questions in the memo regarding the Burns Building and the parking spaces there. To me, it was not clear exactly what is being proposed. It says there are 157 parking spaces for tenants, and then it says there's a potential one parking space for 520 square feet of lease space. Is that 157 plus the 501 space for 520, or is that inclusive of that, or would I be able to get some clarification either from the manager or Mr. Blythorn?
Madam Manager, can you help us with that?
So I understand that to be that the terms being offered is one parking spot for 520 square feet, and I'm getting nods from the proposer and the lands manager in the back.
And thank you.
Not additive.
Very, very good, and thank you both for being here. I appreciate that. Good question, thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you. I think I brought this up in Public Works when the RFI came through, but in the RFI, we talked about 5 to 10 years potential lease, and with the Burns building being, the PFD building, is there any concern from city staff about taking up currently vacant state space that may give sort of a excuse or a reason that we can't move jobs back to Juneau for 5 to 10 years? Is that a concern that city staff have thought through? Is there any potential mitigation? I don't know. I'm just trying to gauge thought process there.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is the top of mind question that not only really the Assembly has to struggle with the Burns building. And I did, the Lands Manager Blythorn did reach out to Ms. Richter about, concerns with occupying this shared space with the Permanent Fund Corporation, because they're probably one of our most important, our friends and neighbors who work at the Permanent Corporation we want to keep here. And I got a very confident response that the entity, and I can either read it, Deputy Mayor Hale, or I could invite Ms. Ricker up to answer that question. But so I'm sorry I'm rambling, but you asked about if we're worried that taking that vacant space will will make the state not want to have the opportunity to move back into that space. And we really see a lot of consolidating of state offices. And so I took your question one step further and addressed the issue of the Permanent Fund Corporation being headquartered in Juneau and how important that is. So that's how I got there.
So, Ms. Ricker, would you mind stepping up and addressing that question? We have a spot for you there. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And there's a little button to push to get a green light.
That one. Okay. Hi, my name is Tracy Ricker. I'm a broker with Ricker Real Estate, and I represent the Permanent Fund Corporation. I've been involved in the building for about 30 years, both on the leasing and management side. I'm going to answer the question, I think, is the way that you were asking it. One of the things that we have experienced within this market is the fact that the state is downsizing. And one of the reasons why we have more square footage to house CBJ is because one of the state agencies has verbally said they are not going to renew their lease at the end of mid-25. With that being the case, then they're moving into the 8th floor of the SOB, and I understand that that is completely vacant. So I don't think that we're displacing any potential expansion of private or public sector entities. That's my opinion at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Ricker. Thank you very much. Ms. Atkinson, did that answer your question? Mr. Bryson?
Madam Deputy Mayor, I couldn't figure out how to make this statement into a question. Are we at statement point yet?
Well, do your best. Just put a question mark at the end.
All right. So as we went through this process, through Public Works for a couple of years now that we've been having discussions about what would be the best situation for City Hall. And at no time did we say keeping the city offices separate would benefit anybody. The conversation always came back to having all of the offices together is going to be the most efficient. It's going to be the best way we're going to be conduct business more efficiently. So I would advocate for renting the whole facility and getting everybody under one roof. I really hope that everybody's on board with that. I'm sorry, I don't know how to put that into it. It seemed like the goal that we were getting towards, that the community, the part that the community was okay with, is having the entire city operation under one roof. And
Thank you,
that
Mr.
was my
Bryson.
perspective. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I will be making sure I understand that from everyone, so thanks for leading off with that. So next we have Ms. Uscandies and then Mahal Gadak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thinking of the scenario that Mr. Bryson was just speaking to, if we had everybody under one roof, or if we moved to an option where we had all of CBGA in its entirety and lease space, I'm wondering, Ms. Kester, if there's concerns from an operations side of things, not having full control of the building. I know as things have sort of degenerated at one of our rental properties, you know, we've had issues. I don't know what that relationship has been like, and I wouldn't expect anything like that with the Burns building, but I'm probably places that we're looking at are all of the people who responded already like meeting ADA requirements and that sort of thing. But I'm just wondering if you could speak about if there's any concerns if we were whole shebang in lease space, whether we'd have concerns about needing to negotiate in order to serve the public.
Thank you for that question. Madam Manager.
Thank you. I think that it's well established that the administration's position is owning our own facilities affords us the most control, the most flexibility, and is the most fiscally prudent option. However, the voters of the city and borough of Juneau have told us not once but twice that owning our facility is not an option that they're ready to entertain at this time. I think that the greatest concern I would have moving forward with the Burns building is cost, because we would be, purely at the mercy of the market, as we are today with our leased facilities. So not a risk that we are unfamiliar with.
Thank you. Ms. Uscandies, are you fine with that? Great, thank you. Mahal Gadak.
Just speaking of costs, doing the math at the higher end of the square footage rate would be about $1.6 million a year. Is that about right? That's
Madam
the
Manager.
math that I had.
That's the same iPhone calculation I got when I
Okay. Okay. And then at a rate of increase of 3% per year thereafter for 10 years at this. Okay.
And I see a nod in response. Are there further questions? Mr. Smith, and then Alicia Uscandies, Ms. Uscandies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Do we have plans for what would happen with this facility if we completely vacate it?
Do you mean the building we're in, Mr. Smith?
I do, yeah.
Madam Manager.
No, I do not have plans, and it's a bit of a chicken and an egg kind of issue, which we've discussed from, I think all the issues that this body discusses are a bit of a chicken and egg. Certainly when we were talking about a new facility, we talked about selling this facility. I would probably analyze that a little bit differently through the lens of 100% leased space and do a different analysis. So I don't have a great answer for that question, but we'll certainly put some more thought to it if the direction is to consider moving all employees to leased property. And I don't even know, just to put a caveat on that, I haven't reached out at all to explore what an assembly chambers would look like, to explore if we could shave 2,000 square feet, to explore if maybe we left, a couple of offices downtown, those are all the scenarios that I would need to look into to be able to actually tell you that the consolidation of all our most CBG employees in one facility is even feasible.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is that good, Mr. Smith? Ms. Uscandies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jumping on the previous question as I did before. Towards that end, I talked about with Mr. Blythorn in the past, longer leases are more efficient for everybody involved, and I'm sure they're preferred by the person who's leasing out their building. But, obviously the voters didn't think what we all thought. And so thinking about the future of the building we already own, and that maybe if things changed 5-10 years down the line, then it would be nice to not be trapped in a lease. Could you just speak to that before we weigh in?
Could, Ms. Uscandies, I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
Clearly, I didn't.
Madam Manager thinks she knows.
Thank you. I think your question is the term of the lease. And so the term of the lease that was proposed in this RFI was for 10 years. And I do think that that's reasonable, because if you think about how long it will take for us as a community to talk about a new facility again, a few years at least, and then if that passes, we would have to, spend years designing it. You may have another question for Attorney Palmer about breaking the terms of the lease, and I believe he's prepared to answer that question if you decide.
Attorney Palmer, I do think there is a way to break the lease.
Yeah, thank you. I will not look to the back of the room. I'll look up to you when I answer this question. So every contract that the city has a subject to appropriation clause in it. And that would mean if the assembly decides that it's not in the best interest of the community, you are allowed to break a lease at the end of that lease term subject to appropriation. So it could be at the end of year 7, for example, instead of year 10.
Thank you. And I will look to the back of the room. We're not planning on that. Wahagidak.
Back to the money question. So currently, all of our lease space is at about 800,000. Is that? Feel like that's the number we've been given before.
890, I believe.
890, I hear, yes.
Okay. And I guess this would be a question if we move forward, but there's a lot of full service that comes with this if we do sign the lease for this property. And I would be curious to know, like, what is that counterbalance, how much we're spending in extra, because it's almost double our current lease if we go for the full amount in janitorial, security, all landscaping, all of that kind of stuff. That's a later question. I don't expect you to answer that now.
I would love the chance just to respond that I think that's one of the biggest uncertainties out there is budget. We of course spend, I think $260,000 maintaining this facility, so $1 million right now. I also think that if you authorize me to enter into negotiations, I would be trying to negotiate on a much lower end of that number for all the reasons that you bring up, and then be able to bring you something back that provided a little more cost certainty and did that analysis.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So most likely a 20-year lease would be a 5-year lease with 3 5-year options. The lease rates will have like an initial, I would imagine, I'm probably not speaking too far off the cuff. My experience with leases, the beginning will have like 5, 8, 10 years, but then we'll have smaller options that we'll be able to continue adding on. So I would imagine Madam Manager could structure the lease with those type of terms that we need that would be most advantageous to the city, giving us outs later on down the road. I did want to remind everybody that even while we were in discussions before, that this building needed $14 million worth of renovations, and that was 2 years ago. Who knows what the level of renovations, and then if we did not remove City Hall operations from this building during that level of operations, if we were really going to do a $14 million renovation to this building, we would have to move the people out of the building, or at least a good chunk of them at a time. And so and then that will have millions of dollars. Well, you're right, nobody likes what a lease rate is going to be, but that was the directions the citizen asked us to do, was lease space instead of go build new stuff. That's what we're doing. Let's do it right, have everybody under the same thing, and we won't have to dump $14 million into this building, and that will buy us a good bit of time with leases to figure out what we're going to do for the long-term future of City Hall. Thank you for the time, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson, Ms. Wall. And then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My question is about the assembly chambers. I mean, personally, I don't care where we meet as long as the public can hear us and see us on the screen and in the room. And in my mind, not that that could be anywhere. Does staff have a reason? But I know this room gets used for other purposes besides what we use it for. Is there a significant advantage to having the chambers in the same building as staff would be, from staff's perspective?
Thank you, Madam Manager.
Well, I will give you my opinion, and the clerks may have a different opinion, but I feel like an assembly chambers could be many places that are most convenient to the public. There are many governing bodies across the United States of America that meet in libraries and community centers. And we would just need to, of course, care for all those logistical pieces, probably have some on-site office space, for support. I will say one priority of a site, if it's not, well, one priority of a site regardless, but will be easier to accomplish, is high quality sound in our hybrid environment. So that will be at the top of my list.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Mr. Kelly, and we might as well segue into also trying to address that second question, the Assembly's comfort level of moving all CBJ employees to lease space, or some subset. And so, Mr. Kelly, if you want to weave that in, you're welcome to, but you can do that later too.
I might do that later. I was going to ask a question along those lines at first, but then Ms. Wool's question actually sparked another one that I think I want to ask first. It's my understanding that the the Department of Education and Early Development is a former tenant, and that the State Board of Education used to meet in that room. Would that would those offices be a part of the lease space that we get? Would we be able to use that perhaps for assembly chambers?
Madam Manager.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So if I recall, the proposal does include a boardroom with a kitchen area. I don't know if that was the former Board of Education room, and I don't know if it would be a good fit for assembly chambers. So that's why getting direction from you that says, yes, go forth, do that, investigating would be helpful.
Thank you. Mrs. Scandies, are you willing to kick us off trying to address that question about moving all CB&J employees, just to get a sense of what your comfort level is, and then we can move on to the assembly, rest of the assembly.
I was gonna say I'm on the assembly. Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm kidding. Yeah, it's a tough one. So there's no harm in me going first. You can hear from my hesitation. Obviously, I'll get over the fact that it's not an ideal scenario. So trying to figure out what the most next ideal scenario is. As far as authorizing staff to move forward, gathering more of that information, I'm entirely comfortable with that, because I think part of this is part of my own hesitation is really knowing exactly what that would look like. So I'm fine at that point. I agree. We could meet in the library. We could meet anywhere. We could meet in a gymnasium. So as far as would I be comfortable moving into 100, everybody into lease space? If that's what we need to do, I would just want us to continue on our goal towards moving back towards something better. Maybe we get everybody out of City Hall and we demolish it and we try to make a better case, or maybe champions arise in the city for that idea. So that's kind of where I'm at. And that's really your primary one, right? The 100% lease space. That's what you wanted to hear on?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question, your question.
Is it really that second bullet point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. But thank you for answering both. Excellent. Mr. Smith, can you give us some idea of where you're at with that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Again, kind of in difficult situation. I mean, the voters just twice said, well, their real response was they voted against general obligation bonds, in various multi-$10 million amounts to build a new city hall. So anyway, I don't know if they said you don't want to be in a place you don't own, but anyway, for that question, they did say no to the funds. I'm okay moving forward with getting some more information. I have concerns about everyone being in lease space. I maybe need to go watch or do some more reading. I mean, I have questions too about, I hear that this building has a lot of deferred maintenance. I'm sure most of our city buildings have significant amount of deferred maintenance. I don't think we have any of them that are like, oh, yep, we're caught up. But this one may be worse. Anyway, I'm okay with it. I guess I did actually have one other question.
Oh, yeah, please.
As we're dealing with school district issues and possible consolidation, something that gets brought up is, could City Hall be moved into a high school should that consolidate? Do you have the information to be able to respond to that, Ms. Kester? Or do we need
Madam Manager.
I can't believe that was just oh wait, I have one more, and you drop a doozy.
And it's a bit of cart before the horse, but maybe not. They're in parallel.
I think that there are a lot of questions. I do not have the information to answer that question. Certainly when we were doing the public outreach for a new city hall, a lot of people said, what about the high school, the downtown high school? What about the downtown high school? And, my response in public meetings was, it would be, that would be a very heavy lift. It's a critical facility for our community. Really don't feel like we could get there in the time frame that we need to be able to, make these decisions. I think you will find when the school district presents that none of their consolidation ideas leave a downtown school that would be large enough for City Hall to vacate it. Now, that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be other sites, and that doesn't mean that their plans won't evolve. You heard Superintendent Hauser, they're very much in the middle of that conversation. So while I think that certainly throw, any school conversion would also have a tremendous capital cost, right? Because you'd be changing space. So it's really a much larger conversation that probably has an extended time horizon to actually become a viable option.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, I don't mean to maybe distract us from the question in front of us. So it was my response. Was that sufficient, Madam Deputy Mayor?
I think you were happy to enter into negotiations. I'm not sure you addressed the.
Yeah, I'm okay moving everyone to.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I guess I'm weighing a couple different things. I share the discomfort of not owning any building to have our staff in, at least our downtown staff in. But I also share a discomfort of reducing efficiency by having us spread out, by having some people downtown and then having some of us over at the Burns building. I think I would favor a plan that transitions eventually all city staff over to the Burns building at this time.
Okay.
But I'm open.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you. Yeah, I echo what people have already said. I'm hesitant about everyone being in 100% lead space, but also absent better options. I think one of the biggest arguments we made for the new city hall was that it was not only more efficient for city staff to be all in one building, but it was better for Juneawites as a whole to have one place to go and have their city needs met. So absent better options, I am comfortable with moving people 100% lead space, or as comfortable as I will ever be with it. And since we're in comment period and not in question period, I'm just going to reiterate my discomfort with moving to the PFD building. I'm fine moving forward with negotiations and getting more information, but I'm also uncomfortable with the city thwarting itself and preventing, jobs from moving back to the capital city at some point, state jobs. 10 years is a long time, and we're in a current administration and governor that is not very friendly to the capital city, but it will not remain that way, hopefully. And so I am uncomfortable with that length of time being in state space, but I'm also realizing there's not any better options, and moving forward with negotiations and getting that information is probably what we ought to do.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Wahalgidak.
Yeah, I think everyone who just spoke said it very well. It's not ideal, but we tried two years in a row for better options out there. I think $14 million to renovate this building is just something that we cannot budget right now, not in our current state, and not what is happening with our school district. It's scary to think about school closing and consolidation, and that would definitely not be favorable, in my opinion, to move into any one of the schools, just given the report we got on the economics of Juneau if we don't get more kids into this community. So we need more kids now more than ever if we're going to see a solid economy moving forward. So that would not be favorable to me. I'm good with 100% of us moving, knowing what this building needs in order to keep it functioning safely, literally safely for employees. I think it makes sense for us to be in a space all together, and so I'm for the 100% lease space.
Thank you, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I don't have any philosophical issues with having everyone in lease space. I certainly would want to see the numbers and the options for this building and the differences between some staff here and some staff there, before that decision. But if that's the practical decision, then I'm not worried about it.
And are you fine with Madam Manager moving forward with discussions? Thank you. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I really appreciate everybody's comments and statements. This has been a very, very long conversation. While I regret we did not get to do Plan A, getting everybody in one building, I think is a pretty good Plan B. While you are correct, that was my number one argument against us leasing office space in competition with the state. It was the worst component of the CBJ leasing. However, in this environment that we're in, I could see a benefit of CBJ taking up some of the local office space and keeping a little bit of demand there for it. So that way we don't have office space plummeting out. If we keep moving in this direction, we've increased the demand for office space, or we would be increasing the demand for office space because we'd be taking up a large chunk of it downtown. And then as we're looking out into the future, 10 years, let's say that this city, all of a sudden more state jobs are coming, that would put the CBJ in a position to then revisit the issue. What could we do about a permanent home? If we move the opposite direction, which some of the Department of Labor reports are saying, then we would have a building that might be affordable for the city to purchase as a city hall, or to be able to use some of the offices for some of the other activities. And in terms of schools, we did look at what it would look like or what it would take to renovate a school, and it was almost as expensive as buying a new building. So while the school ideas, it sounds really great on paper, it ended up not being a really easy, smooth answer. So sorry for rambling there, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm very much in favor of us going and renting this facility and having CBJ City Hall in one location. I think the community and the city would be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. And I will say, it's hard to wait until the very end to weigh in, but we were just in Anchorage for the Alaska Municipal League, and I think someone said that the Anchorage City Hall is in lease space, which I found very interesting. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, I believe that we should move all CBJ employees to lease space so that they're together. I think if we can do that, I think we should sell this building because we'll make some money. It's waterfront property. It might have a lot of problems, but I think we should sell this building because then we could use that to offset some of those rent costs. And I also want to point out, and I chaired the joint Assembly School Facilities Committee last year. And through that process, I was made aware, or I learned, that the assembly can actually cannot decide to close a school. That is a school board decision. And the school board obviously is looking at consolidation and possible school closures, but they're going to decide which building that is. And so that's not something that we might be able to weigh in, but we don't get to make that decision. So that's actually an interesting piece of information. I also think it's really great for us to be able to be in a position, since we are going to move forward leasing and not building our own, to be able to, as Mr. Bryson said, to fill some vacant office space in Juneau. I think that's really good. And Madam Manager, I think we're all saying, please do enter into those negotiations. Is there anything further from anyone on this subject? What's that? No? Okay, I don't think we need a motion. I think just instruction. Okay, thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break, just a quick break. We'll be back at 7 and move on. Thank you.
Okay, round three. This is the not echo round. Yeah. Still all right. Good.
It sounds good.
Call the assembly back to order at 7:02 p.m. Madam Manager, can you move us on to the Huna Borough annexation petition, please?
And can I check and see if she's really able to hear us?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. Let's do a little check, Ken. So we use Candy's here.
There she is. Good.
Okay, great. So if I could get the city clerk to share her screen. She has a map that is also on page 58 of your packet. So I am going to start with a summary of annexation in general and with CDJ. And this is referring to Lands Manager Blythorn's memo on page 52 of your packet. Just to kind of take a step back and like, why do we organize in boroughs, right? So the Alaska Constitution actually has a preference for boroughs and requires that boroughs include the population, geography, economy, transportation, and other factors necessary to embrace an area and population with common interests to the maximum degree possible. So there's this propensity for us to be self-organized because our Constitution is very strong in local control, right? Which whenever we visit with our neighbors in the lower 48, we're very proud of that fact. To advance that, in 1997, the Local Boundary Commission, which is the commission that oversees annexation petitions and organization of boroughs, created model borough boundaries. And the purpose of this was just to establish a frame of reference for the evaluation of future petitions. You will see in the figure up there that the model borough boundary for the city and borough of Juneau is the dotted line. So that is the boundary that the state came up with in 1997. City and Borough of Juneau has had a long history of annexation. The memo goes into detail. I will just touch on in 1989, the northern portion of Admiralty Island, where Greens Creek Mine was annexed. In 2010, 2012, the city of Petersburg submitted a petition, and there was, the city and Borough of Juneau objected to that petition, went up to the Supreme Court, and CBJ ultimately lost in that petition. And I'm not going into detail on these just because I'm not sure how germane it is to today's conversation. But then we have probably the history that is the most germane to today's conversation, which is between 2018 and 2019, the city and borough of Juneau voted to prepare a petition by legislative review for Tracy Arm, North Admiralty Island, and Horse and Colt Islands. So this was a project that, for those of you who are in the community then, probably remember had lots of discussion. And there was some controversy over different parts. We ended up submitting a draft petition in 2019 for informational technical review. This local boundary commission responded and said, tweak some of these things. In 2019, we submitted the application for formal technical review. The commission responded and said there's material errors that you need to fix, and the CBJ took no action after that. So we made a couple of attempts after a couple of years of a lot of community conversation. Through that community conversation, the community of Funter Bay was excluded in our application to the local boundary commission. I understand there was a lot of public testimony and comments on that. So where we landed in 2019 was inaction to kind of pick that topic back up.
Madam Manager.
Yes.
So that annexation stalled attempt was for the yellow areas on page 58 and on the map.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you for
Thank
pointing that out. So that was the failed annexation attempt. Now I'm going to move to my cover memo that talks about the little thumb here. And so you will see the red line is the city of Hoonah's petition for the Hoonah Borough. And the little thumb there, that is Mansfield Peninsula, was a portion of the technical review petition that the city and borough of Juneau submitted. It is included in the model boundaries, but of course is currently part of the unorganized borough because no petition was ever successful. And so that's really where I think the conversation, if we can focus the comments in the discussion today on that thumb, I think we would be well served. So just want to
Madam Chair.
give the Assembly, the reason why we're bringing this to you today is to give the Assembly an opportunity to comment on Hoonah Borough's petition. It's important to note that you don't have to comment on.
Ms. Uscandies, are you not able to hear?
Nope, sorry to interrupt. I keep hearing referral to a little thumb, and it would be helpful while we have a visual aid to know what you're referring to.
I couldn't hear that. Oh, what is the little thumb?
Sorry. Thank you. That is Mansfield Peninsula.
So
So you have Horse and Colt Islands there. You have Point Retreat Lighthouse at the tip. You have Funter Bay in the middle. Okay. Just to reiterate, you have an opportunity to comment on the Hoonah Borough petition. Doesn't mean that you have to comment, but it's our obligation to make you aware of this opportunity and then we are hoping to receive direction from you one way or the other so that we can bring forward timely comments before the end of February. And so if you do choose to comment, we would work on drafting a resolution for introduction at the next meeting if the body gets there. And so the important to just note that, again, we can comment on a portion or oppose a portion of their petition without, of course, opposing the entirety of their petition or the laudable goal of self-governance, which I think as local government walks, we can all get behind. And the other reason to really focus on this what I'm calling the thumb that is Mansfield Peninsula is because these geographical areas have strong economic, cultural ties to Juneau, and that is one of the standards that the Local Boundary Commission uses. So, for example, the structures on the parcels of land that are privately owned on Horse and Cold Island many of them have residences with Juneau mailing addresses. They use the docks and harbors in Juneau to access their property, and many of them shop and get mail here. The other bullet points that are included in the memo, and I want to let you know that this was all pulled from the extensive research and legal review that was done in 2019. So I did not go out and do new research. I pulled this from 2019, so that's the caveat for these comments. There's an equity issue, right? Shelter Island, which is essentially one of the islands near Mansfield Peninsula, between Mansfield Peninsula and Juneau, is part of the city and borough of Juneau. It's really not that much different than Horse and Cold Island, for example, and they do pay, Shelter Island property owners do pay property taxes outside the urban service boundary. There are nonprofit organizations in this region that are headquartered in Juneau, and there are commercial operations like Orca Point Lodge that are headquartered here. Also talk about in the memo Greens Creek Mine. So Greens Creek has some facilities in the proposed annexation area, and we do not know, of course, what their expansion plans are, but certainly Greens Creek Mine has strong economic ties to the city and borough of Juneau, and it would be simpler for their operations to all be unified under one borough. So not commenting for them, but just the observations and the economic reasons why you could argue that the Mansfield Peninsula is has closer ties to Juneau. So again, if you do choose to comment, and if you do choose to object to the inclusion of any of those regions in the Hoonah borough, it is not initiating a petition for the city and borough. It is just kind of essentially preserving our right to at some point in the future. So now I'd like to pull up another map that you have as a red folder island, and this just gets into a little more detail, and I'm going to hand it over now to City Attorney Palmer, who's probably navigated these waters more than I have in his vessel and can walk you through more granular detail.
Mr. Attorney.
Would you give me a sense of what you would like? Because I can, once we get the map pulled up, I can give you some geographical reference points, or what does the body feel like it needs?
So I will lead off, and I will also comment to the body that I believe, looking at this assembly, that the only two of us on the assembly that were involved in this conversation before on the assembly was Mr. Bryson and myself, and that was right after we got on the assembly, and it was a huge topic, and it was really hard to understand, and it was controversial. At least that's how I remember it. It was controversial, and anyway, so it's hard to step in where we are and have to make a fairly quick decision. So what we're doing tonight is we're just deciding, do we forward a resolution on to the assembly on Monday to allow for public comment on whether we, what is the word, oppose? Yeah. The petition on certain specific grounds. It's supporting the petition, but just opposing that on certain specific grounds. And so that's what we're doing tonight. It's a lot to come up to speed on. And when I was speaking with staff earlier, I was looking at, Mansfield Peninsula and especially the eastern side. And so if we were going to oppose that petition to include to leave some of those areas in the unorganized borough so that Juneau might preserve that interest to annex them later. I was thinking about just that eastern side, Point Retreat, that sort of thing. And then Mr. Palmer has done a lot of work with our former city manager in the past, trying to figure out where a line down Mansfield Peninsula might go. And that's what I'm looking for, is just some sort of description of what you learned and how that carve out of Funner Bay, why it looks like it looks. So thank you, Mr. Palmer.
You bet. Let me see if I can't do a little geographical tour of a special place near Juneau. So Juneau's over here. Sorry, Ms. Hughes Candies. Juneau's over here with Statter Harbor, for example. This is Douglas Island, North Douglas. Boat ramp is here. I'm going to bump over here to Shelter Island. This is inside our borough. All of these areas on this kind of half circle are all inside the CBJ. Greens Creek Mine, just the actual mine itself is here. The boat launch, or I should say it this way, the access point via boat from the Juneau side is right here. It's a little tiny black line that hugs the south side of Hawk Inlet. So that's this water body that then gets to the mine. And the Greens Creek Mine, like Manager Kester said, is part of the borough. The area in pink, and then also this area, that's Mansfield Peninsula. That's the area that the Hoona Borough wants to annex.
And that's the thumb.
Correct. That would be the thumb. And there's two little islands, Colt and Horse, one smaller than the other, closer to Juneau, close to Douglas Island, that Hoona is also proposing to annex. So proposing to put inside Hoona's borough. And so when we discussed the 2018, 2019 annexation areas, this entire area was called Area D. And the Assembly had some very intense discussions about whether to include all of Area D or to include only portions of it. And ultimately, the Assembly decided on very tight votes, 6-3, 5-4 type votes, to exclude this Funter Bay area. And so to give you a sense of kind of infrastructure that's out here, most of this land is undeveloped, raw land, with a few exceptions. So starting at the very tip, this is Point Retreat. There's a lighthouse out here, an absolutely beautiful lighthouse that's mostly privately owned. There's a weird relationship with the Bureau of Land Management and the Coast Guard, but that lighthouse is generally privately owned. There's a handful of cabins on this west side that are, let's call them privately owned. Technically, they're on leases with the Forest Service. There's a few cabins in Barlow Cove. I don't know if they're lawful or not. And then there's a handful of cabins on the east side of Mansfield Peninsula that are leased through the Forest Service. Again, most of these cabins that I've referenced are under life estate leases with the Forest Service. So Forest Service had a policy that they looked the other way for a long time regarding cabins that were built, and then a decade or so ago, the Forest Service implemented a policy to start a process to remove those cabins, but because of equity reasons, gave those property holders a life estate, so they were able to name somebody who was alive at that time, and that whenever that person dies, that's when the cabins revert back to the Forest Service ownership. So think of them kind of as a lease, maybe a 99-year lease concept. And so those cabins are a little different than the cabins on Colt Island, Horse Island. Those are actually private property, and there's a lot of private property, 100 to 200 lots out there with roughly that, half of those are developed in some shape or another. Sometimes there's full houses out there, sometimes there's small cabins. There is some private property on the Mansfield Peninsula, just inside Horse and Colt Island, but there is a significant number of private property holders in the Funter Bay area. And those are primarily most of these places are either recreational cabins, a few homes, mostly recreational cabins. There's one commercial enterprise in the Horse and Colt Island area, and there are some guide operations for big game hunting in this region. And there are some mining operations. So I mentioned Greens Creek Mine down here. The actual mine is here. They have some facilities right along the edge of Hawk Inlet, and then they have where they do most of their ore loading and unloading. And then they have the boat access point on the Juneau side. There's also another mining company that has some mining interests in this pink area. I don't believe they're affiliated with Greens Creek right now, but they've done exploratory work. Those are, my recollection, the big picture uses. So hunting uses, recreational cabins, a few second homes or homes, mining operations, and then some guiding operations. Those are the connections that, in 2018, 19, that we discovered and revealed. And with those connections, the Assembly initially had the idea that we would seek to annex the entire Mansfield Peninsula, but through the public comment process, the Assembly decided to annex the entire Mansfield except the Funter Bay area. And one of the limits that we have with the Local Boundary Commission is that we need to define areas to annex based on natural landmarks. And so what you see on this map, these kind of blue lines, and then some of are creeks or rivers, and then some of the pink lines are watershed boundaries in concept. Some of this area is really steep, others of it are really flat. And so the Funter Bay area was a compromise to create this kind of oval exclusion based on the natural terrain features. There were other ideas to draw straight lines, say from the inside of Barlow Cove down, and it got really complicated because there was an interest for the Assembly at one point to keep the lighthouse at Point Retreat in the borough. And so if you were to draw a line down, the lighthouse would be outside the borough. And so this was the compromise. This image that we have on the map is the compromise that the Assembly came to, like I said, on very tight votes, 5-4, 6-3 votes. And so what's before us today is what Manager Custer described as an opportunity to comment on HUNA's petition. And if we want to ask the Local Boundary Commission to consider our comments, the most relevant would be an opposition if the body still feels that at some point in the future we might seek to annex this, but just filing opposition does not promise that, does not force it. It just preserves that right in the future. I can go sit in my other seat if that works best for you.
And Mr. Palmer, if we do not file that opposition, then can you explain what happens?
Yes, so if the Assembly takes no action, then the Local Boundary Commission would not have the information from us about who has what community, Juneau or HUNA, has the strongest connections to Mansfield Peninsula. And so presumptively, the HUNA borough would include Mansfield Peninsula if we do not comment.
Thank you. And I think at that point, we are ready for questions, if there are any questions to ask Madam Manager or Mr. Attorney. And thank you very much for that presentation, Madam Manager and Mr. Attorney. Halgidak.
Just wondering what conversations have been had with the Haynesboro, with the community of Angoon, or even the Aquan, because technically that thumb we're talking about is traditional Aquan land.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Madam Manager, on this tight timeline, what conversations have we had even now or in the past?
Yeah, so I can just speak to the outreach that I have done, and we did meet with the city of Hoona and the administrator and mayor and let them know that the Assembly would be having this conversation. So that is the outreach that I have done. Again, I think we were notified of this at the AML meeting, I believe. So about a month ago, and the timeline to comment is end of February. But please, I think any facilitation of those comments or input by the Assembly would definitely, I think, help you guys make a decision.
Thank you. Ms. Euskandis.
Thanks. Related to outreach, you said in your memo that they weren't surprised that you reached out when you met with HUNA based on our previous annexation. And I'm curious if you could add a little bit more commentary to their response. I assume you were talking about D with them, and if you could characterize any additional things that came out of that meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Euskandis. Madam Manager.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that the City and Borough of Juneau has a pretty long-established, productive working relationship with the City of Hoona. I know that the current administrator and former manager Watt were close friends, and we always would take time to visit each other's communities. And so I know that the administrations had conversations about this very Mansfield Peninsula, and oh, we should, let's talk about this, let's talk about that, and so when I say it had come as no surprise, that's because the City of Hoona was well aware of our previous annexation attempts because of the close communication. I think that when staff had that meeting, we of course said that there's no way, and it was staff and Mayor Weldon and the Hoona administrator and the mayor of Hoona. There's no way for us to say what the assembly will do, but we just said that in the past, we've submitted a technical petition for this area, and so I expect them to take that up for discussion. And I think their comment was something like, all right, well, let's see how it plays out, I think was kind of the tenor of the conversation.
Thank you, Madam Manager.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Regarding petitions, I would, just to confirm, a more consolidated, or like the larger area you're petitioning, the potential more chances that your petition is not accepted or something. Like if we, I guess I'm kind of getting back to like, okay, if we do make a petition, if we do petition against this or object, excuse me, like is drawing a line down the thing, is that going to be more likely to be, held up by the LBC, or will trying to do the whole Mansfield Peninsula be more? Anyway, I'm sorry if this isn't making sense, but hopefully I've said enough words that maybe you can answer.
Mr. Attorney.
I will do my best to decipher, but I think, Mr. Smith, we have a fair amount of data from the 2018-2019 project that if the Assembly directs tonight or anytime soon before February 28th, we could file a public comment supporting the bulk of Hoona's project and objecting to portions of this, whether the Assembly wants to object just to Horse and Colt Islands, for example, or if the Assembly wants to object to Horse and Colt and the entirety of Mansfield Peninsula with the Thunder Bay exclusion. I think you have a lot of options, and I think we have the data to back it up. So it just depends on what the will of the body is.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Smith?
It does.
Thank you. Ms. Wall, did you have a question? No. Ms. Euskandis, I think you have another question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciated, I know I had already asked you, Madam Manager, about the history of some of the previous work on this, or tried to clarify my memory. I'm wondering if anyone has a response of when LBC found those errors and returned the petition as deficient. At what point did that go? Was that an information item for the Assembly and they declined to take that up, or what? Why was that not correct and had resubmitted?
Mr. Palmer.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding the process.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I'm the last staff person standing on this one, so it comes to me. I'll give you a couple of key timelines. The Assembly had some very robust discussions in the summer, and then we had an election. The topic of annexation was a small but relevant portion of the debates, and the city manager and I, after the election, had a conversation, and we did not feel like the Assembly supported going forward with the annexation petition as it was currently framed. And we had a conversation with the mayor and deputy mayor at the time, and the conversation was, let's put this on hold for the time being, and we have it ready to go in case we need to come back.
And then COVID happened.
And then we had a massive pandemic.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other details, but yes, you're right.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Palmer, what would be the impacts if we did nothing or what could potentially be some of the impacts if we proposed and said, no, we don't want you to have all this land? What are the potential outcomes for the residents of this property? What would happen to them if we went one way or the other, sir?
Is it Mr. Palmer? Okay, good.
Sure. So there's a couple interesting things that could happen. If the CBJ decides not to comment, then presumptively all of this land, Mansfield Peninsula, Horse and Cold Island, and the Thunder Bay areas would become part of the Hoonah Borough. And those people that have property there would be then subject to Hoonah laws, whatever they end up being. However, if the city comments and objects, and assuming the local boundary commission follows and agrees with our objection like it did with the Petersburg objection that we filed, then Mansfield Peninsula, Horse and Cold Island, but not Thunder Bay, so Mansfield Peninsula, Horse and Cold Island would then be in the would remain in the unorganized borough and not be subject to Hoonah or Juneau.
Are there further questions? I have one question. If we, I think if we have to decide if we are going to object, and then we have to decide what area we would object, at this point, would we be required to exclude Thunder Bay from our objection, or is one option that the entirety of Mansfield Peninsula would be part of the objection? Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Hale, the body has the choice. The body could follow the past assembly's direction and keep Thunder Bay excluded, or if the body decides you want to object to the Mansfield Peninsula in its entirety, you could do that too.
Okay, thank you. I see no further questions. Mr. Smith, do you have a motion?
I'll give it a shot. I would move that the Assembly direct staff to draft a resolution objecting to the Mansfield Peninsula. I feel like referencing a map would that be more helpful for staff? I'm going to just say the Mansfield Peninsula as indicated on the red folder item map, as well as Colt and Horse Island. And yes, drafting a resolution objecting to the inclusion of the entire Mansfield Peninsula area, including Horse and Colt Island, from this map, but not excluding Thunder Bay.
Are there any, before we go, well, we can go to objections if there are any objections, but also comments. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm going to object. I feel like I've already spent more time on this than I would like. I feel like we can't step into this without stepping into it. And we've got a lot of other things that should be priorities right now. If people are coming and asking us for this, then that might be a different story, but that hasn't happened. And I don't know, I get really uncomfortable with us sitting around a room and drawing lines on maps that is stolen land. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. And Wahalgidak and Mr. Bryson.
Yeah, I'm also going to be an objection and a no vote on this. I think that the annexation conversation is one thing. What we're talking about in terms of what the CBJ wants as a new assembly, because there's a lot of new faces here that weren't a part of the original conversation for what that would look like for the CBJ. As was just stated, we can't step in it without stepping in it. And do we want to start this conversation? I don't want to object just to object, just because we think that maybe somewhere down the line, maybe 10, 20 years from now, this might be something we want. It's a conversation that if if we don't have a solid plan behind us, doesn't feel like it's really thought through. And I also would like to see conversations happen with the other landowners that, or the other borough property boundaries that abut this particular thumbnail. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm glad Mr. Smith did this ordinance so that would give us a chance to look into this a little bit more, because we wouldn't vote on the ordinance tonight. It would get written up and it'd give us time to learn a little bit more. I did have a question along the lines of Ms. Wool and Wahaugaduck. What is the cultural significance of Juneau not making a statement on this, or versus Juneau making a statement on this? What is the cultural significance? I want to turn to Wahaugaduck because I don't know enough about this. I don't know what the implications are. Is it culturally significant for our city to be involved or not involved? Or would that even be a component of it?
Well, Gita.
As a Haida person, not from this territory, I can't claim to speak for the Aquan. But if that's why I was asking the question, what are the Aquan saying? What would they like? Are they interested in this at all?
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I originally put my hand up because I was not understanding Mr. Smith's what he was doing in terms of Funter Bay, but since our objections on the floor, I will say, reviewing this for the reasons that Ms. Wall and Wahaugaduck stated, watching as a resident, I wasn't thrilled about those close votes and the annexation process then. And had we gone forward at that point, then this would have been taken care of, because I do think there's a strong case for these lands to have economic and residential ties to Juneau. But as we have not, to wait until someone else is doing it, it doesn't feel great to me, so I'll probably be a no vote on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I find myself on the fence with this one, especially considering the comments about this being, possibly, stolen land. Were any of those comments brought up? I guess this is, if I may ask a question. I'm wondering if any of these comments were brought up in prior discussions when we were discussing the annexation in previous years.
Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you. Complete transparency, the topic of annexation, especially Admiralty Island, there wasn't much concern with the Tracy Arms section, so part near that was contested with Petersburg in terms of opposition. But Admiralty Island was subject to significant opposition. I cannot minimize that. And I recall the community of Angoon came to Juneau at least once with a number of community members to protest both outside and voice their concerns inside, this building, this facility. So it's definitely a significant concern that the Assembly had back in 2018 and 19. So it may have led to some of the line drawing around Funter Bay that you see today or that we saw on that map.
Thank you. I don't see further comments at this time. So one of my concerns about us not moving this forward at this time to the Assembly on Monday, the 5th, is we're making the decision that we won't allow members of the Aquan or leadership of the Aquan, for example, to comment on what was Aquan territory. We won't allow other members of the city of Juneau to actually comment on the petition, because if we don't have an ordinance to be heard on Monday or a not an ordinance, I guess it's a resolution, to be heard on Monday, it stops here. So my concern is we aren't making a decision at this meeting to go forward or not with the opposition. What we're doing is we're making a decision to make a decision at the Monday meeting or a future assembly meeting and to allow our citizenry to comment. It's not a lot of time, but we haven't had a lot of time regardless. So we haven't had a lot of time, and we're not necessarily giving people a lot of time, but we can certainly publicize that. So for those reasons, I will, and for example, if we don't want to, my mic just gave up. Oh. Test. Oh, so for example, whether Funter Bay is included or excluded, that can be decided at a later date. So for that reason, I will vote yes. Ms. Hughes-Gandes.
Sorry, still on mute. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question based on a comment you had made me want to make sure I understand. During the local boundary commission process, it's for Mr. Palmer, I suppose. Residents of Juneau can weigh in on that process, can they not?
Mr. Palmer, what is the role of citizens without local government?
Yeah, no, thank you. So the public comment period is open on up through February 28th to everybody, including citizens or groups, including other governments if they want to comment as well. So that's the start of the process, and that's when the local boundary commission and HUNA would then consider what that feedback is. There's a second opportunity to comment during the hearing, but I don't remember when that's scheduled. It's a little ways out, but this is the big one, which sets up the hearing and what HUNA and the local boundary commission look for in the formal petition when it gets reviewed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I guess I echo your comments, and I have reached out to people that I know to see what their thoughts are. I think by not taking action, I mean, and maybe people have a problem with Funter Bay, and maybe we could look at another motion after that if that's the issue. But I feel like it doesn't mean we have to vote for the resolution, and it gives us a chance to hear from the public on to reach out to tribal leaders and other things. So anyway, and then I guess just briefly on the comment about lines on a map, I don't think we're necessarily drawing those. I mean, there is an extensive history of people having done this work and model boundaries. And I mean, anyway, I don't feel like we're drawing them. I think there's been a lot of work that's gone into that over the years. So anyway, thanks. Those are my comments.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Are there further comments? Madam Clerk, will you please note the roll? Call roll, please.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Ms. Wall.
No.
Ms. Atkinson.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Walakida.
No.
Ms. Hughes-Gandes.
No.
Mr. Bryson.
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Hale.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 yeas, 3 nays.
Thank you. And now moving on to legislative capital priorities list. It was in our work session packet, and Madam Clerk graciously included it in the red folder in case anyone forgot the work session packet. So these are the legislative priorities that we discussed with our delegation last week. The big question is we I don't think we are approving it right now, or are we moving to approve it? The big question is, are there any items on this list that are out of order? Is there anything that needs to be prioritized from assembly members' perspective? Or are we good with the list as it is? I'll give people just a minute because I see people looking down at the list right now. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I was just thinking back to the meeting we had last week with the delegation and federal lobbyists and others. And my sense, having worked in the legislature for a Juneau delegation member, I mean, you know, the list is useful, very useful. You know, a lot depends on projects they put forward that, you know, just matter to the politics and the funding and things available. Anyway, I think we all had our chance to rank them, and anyway, I don't know. I don't know how useful it is to spend a bunch of time trying to redo those rankings, but obviously the body can do what it will do. But I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
This body does. I have Hoggaduck and Mr. Bryson.
The only thing that I would question is where'd it go? Ranking number 12 with the Juneau School District, and I'd just be curious to know from them if that's still something they feel strongly about listing in the way that they have prioritized it, or if they want, in light of everything that's happened, if they have changed their mind in terms of what their ask is for our list.
Madam Manager, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, thank you. So this request for security and safety upgrades, we've seen for a couple years in a row. This was, I think, in response to some feedback. Before that, it was Mendenhall River and Marie Drake total renovations to the tune of like $25 to $40 million. And the feedback was, hey, give the assembly something a little bit more tangible. So we haven't gone back and checked in with the school district since the recent deficit news has broken. I think what I would say is I think they have limited capacity to answer that question right now, just because they're really struggling on problem solving. They do have an item higher up on this list, which is JSD-wide HVAC and heating control system upgrades. And we have a detailed report on the facilities that kind of need those the most. Our engineering department actually manages those projects. So because the HVAC is ranked a little higher, I would anticipate that if there were an opportunity for school funding, that it would go to that project. And I'm confident that there would be ways to spend that money on HVAC upgrades efficiently.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to compliment the Assembly because these rankings look so similar to the rankings that we did last year. If you listen to our meetings that we've all attended, these projects it made a lot of sense to me seeing that the numbers didn't change, because we've talked about every single one of those in one committee or another, and for them to fall in line similarly to the rankings that we had last year, but with some of the actions that we've done over the year, were reflected here in the legislative. So it just means that we all really focused on, what we've been doing over the last year, what we've been discussing, and it seems like we're all kind of, I don't want to use the wrong expression, rowing in the same direction, and this legislative priority list indicated that we were. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, and I apologize because I should know this in my other capacity, but is the JSD-wide HVAC heating control system upgrades on the school major maintenance list for the state, or no?
Good question. Madam Manager.
I do not think so, but I cannot answer that question with certainty. I will have to follow up.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Manager, I realize that I leapt into this topic without asking you to introduce it. Was there anything that I should have said?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. The only thing I want an opportunity to explain is at the legislative breakfast, you also had a cover memo that listed the federal priorities. And you recall that our lobbyist, Katie Catchell, said, hey, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know if we're going to have a continuing resolution. We don't know if we're going to have a new budget. If we have a new budget, maybe we submit these priorities. We have buckets, and buckets of money can only be, only certain projects can be in certain buckets. And we wouldn't want to compete with ourselves in those buckets. So all that is to say that I will continue to work with the lobbyist on our congressionally directed spending requests, and the legislative priorities really provide a good guide when there are buckets that are available. What I'm going to do is pick the projects that you guys have ranked the highest. So and because that deadline right now looks like it's March 1st, I will be able to, keep you in the loop on those decisions. So unfortunately, the big surprise, the federal process isn't as organized as our nice state process, but I will keep you informed and ask that you afford staff some flexibility as we try to respond to opportunity.
Thank you very much. Are there any further comments or questions? It doesn't look like there are any updates. So I think we are ready to finalize this draft list.
Deputy Mayor, we will put this on the consent agenda at the next meeting, and it will be so very official.
Very good. Thank you. We will have an official priorities list. Do we need a 5-minute break before we're going to take a 5-minute break? Let's be back here at 7:55.
Test, test. Are we still getting? Yeah, still getting it. It's not that issue.
Test, oh, we're not on. Mrs. Candies, I see you. We'll call the meeting back to order at, I think it's 7:56 p.m. And we are moving on to, and I appreciate everybody's staying right on target. Thank you. We're moving on to the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund ordinances. Madam Manager, I will go to you this time.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hale. So you have a cover memo on page 59 in your packet. And it is trying to facilitate deliberation on two ordinances before you awarding low interest loans from the Affordable Housing Fund. The first ordinance before you, we'll call it version U, is $900,000 to Coogan Alaska LLC for 18 one-bedroom units on Cordova Street in West Juneau. I'd like to point out there's a typo in my cover memo that says, references the 20% of area median income when it should say 80% of area median income. So you'll recall that the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund guidelines require 20% of your units to be 80% of area median income. And I got my 2s and my 8s confused throughout this memo, so I will try to clarify that. So although the application does not include that specific affordability component that is in the guidelines, it certainly achieves that intent by saying the proposed rent will be $1,400 a month, and we have in the ordinance adjusted that number for inflation. So the application, the applicant said they would maintain the rent at $1,400 a month or below. And so that is the kind of affordability component that was written into this application. We have notified the applicant that this is under consideration. So maybe before I move on to discussion on ordinance version B, which is to Chilkat Vistas, I will pause to see if there are any questions on the first ordinance.
Are there any questions? Wow,
Yeah, just because we had a long discussion about what had taken place before where an applicant had come back to us and said, oh, by the way, we can't do it now. We can't make these affordable. We're looking for an exemption, and we gave them one. But we also talked about during that time what it would look like to ensure that that never happens again. What assurities do we have now to make sure that if we approve these, that they will maintain the affordability that is built into our current application process?
Yeah, so that's a really great, great conversation that is teed up for your next agenda item, which is a resolution formalizing the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund guidelines. So kind of having that conversation with the Assembly on how strict do you want to be? I think it's hard to say what guarantee do we have, because an assembly can do whatever it wants. And, you know, even if you adopt guidelines by resolution that just says, no, it just kind of sends the message, right, that these are more firm. But then, of course, by ordinance, the assembly can exempt from those guidelines. So, you know, I think it's a little bit cultural, right? So the more times that we stick to our guns, the more acculturated the community will be to it. And I will say that, you know, the market conditions change, right? So it was a different market condition when that decision was made.
I see no further questions, so we will move on to Vista Properties.
All right, thank you. So ordinance version V is 2.25 to Chilkat Vistas. You'll recall that when the ordinance before you is for 45 units, 18 efficiency, and 27 one-bedroom units. Since submitting that application and introduction of the ordinance at the last regular assembly meeting, the developer, Chilkat Vistas, came to the manager and said, oh, market conditions have changed. I can't do that same project anymore. And with help from Mayor Weldon, who was quite the advocate for affordable housing on this project, said, okay, well, the Assembly's added more funding so we can do your project. Your project scored really well. What can you do? And so the proposal that they came back with, which they felt like was something that they could manage from a financing perspective, was 48 units with 14 capped at the $1,400 a month adjusted for inflation metric, and 31 units at 80% AMI, and that's $1,700. And these would all be efficiency units. So you'll see in your packet, you actually have a floor plan of the unit. So they are requesting that the ordinance be amended to reflect those changes.
Madam Manager, is it that it would be 1,700 or up to 1,700? Because 1,700 is 80% of AMI.
Correct. It is up to. So that would be the limit. And then, of course, that number is adjusted annually by HUD. It's a number that's set, I believe, by HUD and is adjusted by inflation.
Thank you, Madam Manager. I'm looking for questions. There is an amendment in the packet that will achieve that change. Ms. Uscandies, did you want to introduce that amendment?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'll just call it, if you guys have it in front of you, I'll just call it Amendment 1. So I would move Amendment 1, and you just heard the chair speak to what it will achieve. It adjusts things in several places, so I won't attempt to verbalize them, but it makes those changes to adjust those numbers. And I guess I'd ask unanimous consent, or if people have comments or questions.
Are there any objections to that amendment? Ms. Wall.
This is maybe just a point of order. I have no objections, but have we moved any of these ordinances yet?
Well, that's a good point.
Just moving them into this guy.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. So the ordinance has been introduced. So if the body wants to make an amendment to it, you can act as if it's been moved for public hearing.
Thank you. I'm always wrong, so thanks for correcting me.
Yeah, but you got to keep me in check here. So I see no objections. Turn myself off. Ms. Uscandi's, are you also moving this amendment to the meeting? I believe it's being heard on the 5th, is that correct? Are you also moving this amendment to that meeting?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I realized I forgot the all-important bit of that, which is to move it back to the full assembly for public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Uscandi's. Are there any objections to that? Seeing no objections, these will be heard on Monday, February 5th. Moving on, because time does allow, Madam Manager, item 10, formalizing the Juneau Affordable Housing Guidelines. Would you like to talk us through this?
Yes, thank you. I will just note that this is a little bit of could be a meaty topic, or it could not. So that's why it's under the if time allows category. So this memo talks about the history of the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund. It talks about the timeline that we go through for advertising it, and really tries to give a lot of background information on the fund. This was a really good exercise for me to put together because I haven't been very involved with it. So it was a nice learning experience. But essentially what we do is, what staff does is we have a solicitation period, and we use the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund guidelines for that solicitation. In an ideal world, before we issue that solicitation would be the time that the assembly tweaks it and says, hey, we want to add, extra points for heat pumps because that's a priority for our community, or we want to incentivize 3-bedroom units because we've gotten all these efficiencies, but there's also families that need affordable housing, or, you would give that input early in the process. Then we would solicit those applications. And there's a pretty extensive timeline on page 73 of your packet that walks through that process. And there's a staff committee that makes recommendations. They take it to the lands committee. And then, of course, you see that. I think that, staff believes there are some ways that we could improve the process. And so you'll see on the second page of the memo, on page 74 of your packet, it talks about process improvements that staff recommends. And paramount among them would be adopting by resolution some suggested terms and conditions, which are also there on page 2 of the memo. Most of these are in the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund guidelines. And I think that the idea is that the more clear we could be with applicants, that nope, this is the timing, this is the available funding, and this is the process, then the more seamless that the process would go, instead of having this process where we go through all of the kind of application and formal review and then things get tweaked by the end. Now, there are pros and cons to adhering to these guidelines. And of course, the assembly can still do whatever the assembly wants, whenever it wants. I mean, obviously within charter and law guidelines. So, I look at it kind of like I was explaining on the previous agenda item, it's almost more cultural. And I think like the culture there's some things that culturally you guys, you don't tweak a whole lot. You just kind of let happen. And there's some things that you're very involved in. So it's kind of a philosophical conversation for you. And do you want to try to adopt these guidelines by resolution and, help really set clear parameters? So we'd come back to you with a resolution that would have the suggested essential terms and conditions and guidelines in there. This would, could be reviewed annually before the period. Or do you want to maintain the flexibility of kind of being able to change things, being able to use the Affordable Housing Fund for other expenses? I mean, there's an example in here, I think, of the Community Foundation, right, wanting to have an appropriation from the Assembly to be able to respond quickly to buy residential buildings that come up for sale. That would be something that maybe the body feels like is a good use of Affordable Housing Fund, but is clearly outside the adopted guidelines. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't ever do that, but it's kind of this philosophical question of how strongly you want to establish or adhere to those guidelines and how much flexibility do you have. And one prompt that actually Assemblymember Hugh Scandies and I talked about when kind of going in circles, because I think we've gone in circles on this, is the Assembly okay awarding funds through the Affordable Housing Fund if there's no affordability component? So I just leave that with you to kind of prompt conversation. You'll see that the recommendation at the end of this memo is to discuss Assembly appetite for formally adopting the Juneau Affordable Housing Fund and guidelines. If there is interest, direct staff to draft a resolution formalizing terms and conditions of the program. So I fully expect that at today's meeting, you could say, yes, let's introduce a resolution. You could say, let's talk about it some more, or you could say, you know, I think it's kind of working, so let's not touch it.
Are there questions, thoughts about the proposal before us? Mr. Bryson and Mr. Kelly. Mr. Smith, did I see your hand up? No. Mr. Bryson, Mr. Kelly, Wahagadak.
So the Affordable Housing Fund is a tool that this Assembly has to help housing advance. If we get into trying to have a finite process that is like super defined, I was thinking back to like bankers that go to college and they get their processes and they have whole systems and they're very defined. And we're trying to be what the bank can't be right now. If the bank was working just fine and the system was working, we didn't need the affordable housing loan, we wouldn't have to do this, and they could go to the bank and they could go through the process and get their money. The affordable housing funds that we've used are for the circumstances that aren't bankable, are for the circumstances outside of banking. By us allowing the affordable housing fund to be flexible, we are allowing projects that if we kept it into a strict standard, like a banking procedures, and used the same underwriting strategies, so that way we were doing 100% guaranteed, we didn't put any of our money at risk. That's a banker's responsibility. With the Affordable Housing Fund, we were asking the developers of the community to stretch beyond what the normal safeguards of banking loaning would be. A banker would want you to be protected, have plenty of cash set aside, and would want the circumstance so that nothing could go wrong. We're asking developers to build low-income housing in a time when the market conditions don't lead to that. That's why allowing this Affordable Housing Fund to be as flexible as we need it to be, it's our tool. Why would we restrict ourselves? Thank you very much for the time, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I have Mr. Kelly, Wahagadak, and Alicia. Ms. Hughes-Scandies, sorry, Alicia. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I actually find myself a little bit more on the fence after hearing Mr. Bryson speak than I was before I heard Mr. Bryson speak. But I think my initial inclination is that I kind of like the idea of having an apolitical process that people, the developers, they know what to expect beforehand. They can draft their applications according to those standards, and we can process them accordingly. And then, of course, as has been often repeated, if there is something that is really outstanding, we still have the ability as the Assembly to do whatever we want. I'll take that card from the Madam Manager. She said we can do whatever we want. So I'm leaning on at the moment of going towards the guidelines, but I'm not dead set on it.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And I like it that we maybe change our mind when we listen to each other. That's really great. Wahagadak.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I am definitely on the side of let's formalize something, something that gives us a little bit of guidelines. This is not just money that comes out of nowhere. This is money that comes from our citizens, and we have a responsibility to manage that in a way that provides for our community. You know, when organizations and businesses come to us, I want to know that they're coming to us as honest individuals who really care about this community, want to do great for it, because otherwise they could go to a bank. We are very flexible. Our terms are definitely greater than they would ever get at a bank. And so a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses come to the CBJ and ask for funding to be able to build affordable housing in this community. And I want to see that maintained, to be true to their word and true to this community and true to our citizens. We have an obligation to at least put some kind of criteria and some framework around maintaining what the title of this particular fund is called, Affordable Housing Fund. So I would like to see some guidelines. I don't want to make it so that it's absolutely impossible to be able to access these funds. I do want the flexibility in there, but as was said, we are able to be flexible even when there's guidelines in place. We can see a great project and still be flexible around it if need be, because we are the assembly. So I'll just put that caveat in there.
Thank you, Halkidak. Ms. Euskandis, and I see that I have Ms. Atkinson and Ms. Wall afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the manager for this. We spent a lot of time talking about it, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So it's, I very much appreciate this memo. I guess just adding my own thoughts to the mix. I think we all know we're terrible, this particular assembly and probably all assemblies, at following the rules. So I will echo the comments that, you know, a resolution still allows you to bend the rules to meet a great project when one comes along. So I'm not overly concerned about that, but I do think maybe having a framework around things, what I like is, I mean, we can always have that discipline to try to stick to what, if we agree that these are good guidelines, even if they binding or not, it's more about a philosophical, are we on the same page of what we want to use this fund for, so that staff knows. Because what's most attractive to me is the idea of cutting months off of a process so that we're not doing this very slow back and forth with the manager's office or with staff in general. And they know kind of, this is what, you know, go forth and do in this lane. This is what this pot of money is for. And then we have other pots of money for things that are outside of that. Or if this is the best pot of money and we want to change the rules, we can always do that too. So I don't really see a downside to this. I see lots of potential upsides. And I like having formalized so that there's not this back and forth negotiation that, yes, if you're doing this, we want these units to be affordable according to these HUD guidelines, because it's in the name. So those are my thoughts.
Excellent. Good discussion. Thank you. Ms. Atkinson.
Well, Ms. Euskandis just hit on exactly what I was going to hit on, which is that, anything that can cut down 6 months out of the process is really vital. With the scope of our housing issue, these loans getting processed quickly, I think, should be one of our biggest concerns. And I like that adopting these criteria would do that. So that's about all I have to say on that.
Thank you. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. A question and then a thought. My question is, if we adopted guidelines, our current guidelines, the two projects that we just forwarded to the full assembly, and we'll see if they're successful, but assuming they are, those would have been okay, right? Those fit within our guidelines.
Madam Manager.
I think it would depend on what the guidelines are, but certainly it is my interpretation of the current guidelines, which have not been adopted, that those projects fit within them.
Great, that's helpful. I would caution the assembly about spending too much time tweaking the guidelines. I think the guidelines have been developed by many people more in the weeds than we are. Certainly if staff come and say this one's not working, then that would be the right time to change it. But that's what, I'm okay adopting guidelines to provide that stability that we've been talking about, but I do not want this body getting in a big conversation about what those guidelines should be, because that's already happened.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure if we've slowed down the process at all by, I don't know if, this meeting or others. I think a reminder to myself and others on the Assembly is, these projects were screened by this committee, the review group or whatever, not a committee or whatever. And then they did come to lands, and there was a good amount of information there, and then we made a decision there, and then they come to the Assembly as, in terms of an ordinance or whatever. Like, it's good for us to be looking at, the information presented in those committees and not necessarily needing to pull it to a cow or finance or something, just to be able to go to those documents and look at those resources there, talk to staff, and make changes if you need at other points along the way, and not having extra meetings on things that do probably slow things down. So just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Mr. Smith. I think it's a great idea for us to move this forward, because I think that's the question Madam Manager has asked us to tackle. I will just bring up a comment from my oft-repeated discussion about the book that I've been reading for a long time about fixing the broken housing crisis, or whatever, I can't remember the name of the book. Rules stop projects. And so we hear a lot about the difficulty that they have in California actually building housing. And one of the reasons cited is there are so many rules. There's local zoning, there's just layer upon layer upon layer of rules that are all there for good reasons. So I think it's important as we have this discussion that we remember that we not burden ourselves with too stringent guidelines. I think these two projects that we are moving to the Assembly tonight, that's a lot of units that we would be putting out into the market, and we want to be doing that. So that's my caution. Are there any further comments? Thank you, Madam Manager, for bringing this to us, and I think we're ready for further discussion. Thank you. I don't think we need a motion, do we, Madam Manager?
I am interpreting this as direction to bring a resolution to the body. It won't be at the meeting on the 5th, to establish guidelines by resolution. Unless.
Darn, we could have had you do a motion, Ms. Wall. Would you like to move that?
I move that we direct the city staff to bring us a resolution that would formalize our current affordable housing fund guidelines and ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. That seems to have passed. Moving on, Assembly goals retreat follow-up. I'm amazed we're here. Madam Manager.
Thank you. I have to say, this item is lacking a cover memo, and it could have been because I wasn't optimistic that we would get here, or I was tired of writing memos. So I'm going to give you a verbal cover memo. A document before you is the goals that have been amended by staff and by some of you who have had homework assignments after the retreat. I think it would be really great if the Assembly could discuss these goals and forward them for formalization at the next assembly meeting, because then you have them on your website and everyone can refer to them and staff can print them out and do all the things. And I think you're really close. You also have in your packet 2 documents that are far too giant to tackle tonight. But they were addressed at the retreat, and so I wanted to provide this as an opportunity to follow up on them, not just for the body, but also for the public. And the first item in there is revisions to Title 49 and what that could look like. And you can see that Director Lawhorn has a number of some different scenarios on, like, we could do a phased approach, we could do an overhaul, and I don't expect debate on that at this time, but I thought it was really important to get that out in the community so that your constituents and the body could look at that and say, what do I want? So I guess I would like that topic and the memo from Ms. Pierce, which is also follow-up on the tourism conversation. She did present that at the Lands Committee today, but those topics to just continue on to our next regular assembly meeting, regular committee of the whole on the 26th. But again, I wanted, because they were goal-oriented, I wanted to include them as follow-up, just to let you know that we are continuing to try to push the ball forward on those bigger items.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Are there any comments or thoughts on the goals that we see before us? Any changes that anyone would like? I have one small change, but I'll wait to see if there's anything else, or I'm not seeing any. I would like to recommend one small change for Goal 5B on page 79. And that goal is stated as identify and prioritize the most cost-effective energy efficiency and electrification upgrades in general government facilities. And I'd like to replace general government with CBJ. So we're talking about all of CBJ, including Bartlett and the school district, as well as the assembly. And so I'm seeing no objection to that. Madam Manager, do we need a motion for this?
Yeah, I think a motion to put this at the next assembly meeting would be appreciated.
Mr. Kelly.
I move that the committee of the whole move the assembly goals as amended for approval at the next assembly meeting. And ask for unanimous consent.
And I see no objections. Our next meeting date is February 12th, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. Please note the time. That is a special meeting. I apologize for the special meeting, but it was too full an agenda. We would be here until 11 if we put it on today. Madam Manager, do you have anything further before we close?
Just a reminder that we get to see all your beautiful faces and the school board tomorrow at 5:30.
Thank you all. What a good meeting, and we are adjourned.
Thanks, guys. Nice to see you.